Olivia Bennet had spent 8 years protecting a secret so fragile that even the thought of it being discovered made her heart race. Yet every morning, she opened the small cafe she had built from scratch, arranging pastries on the counter and brewing fresh coffee as sunlight streamed through the windows, unaware that today would be unlike any other. Her twin children, Ava and Noah, played quietly in the corner, their laughter light and carefree, a stark contrast to the weight on her shoulders. While Olivia glanced at the door with a practiced calm, knowing she had to appear composed for customers, her mind wandering to the complicated life she had woven for herself, a life full of hard work, missed social events, and carefully guarded conversations with friends who never asked too many questions. Because they understood she was fiercely protective of her family, and she was not about to let anyone disrupt the fragile balance she maintained. As she wiped down the counter, she reflected on the countless nights she had spent worrying about bills, school projects, and the health of her children, and how despite the exhaustion, there was an undeniable pride in what she had accomplished alone. Yet even with her independence, there lingered a quiet longing for a connection she had once had, a part of her past that had remained tucked away, unspoken, but always present, a delicate memory of love that she had never shared with anyone. And while she served a customer a steaming latte with a smile, her thoughts drifted to the what-ifs and the moments that had led her to this point, moments of sacrifice and choices made out of love. As she listened to the soft chatter in the cafe, feeling the ordinary pulse of life continue around her, never suspecting that the ringing of the doorbell and the sound of a stranger's entrance would soon introduce a ripple into her carefully curated world, a ripple that would bring with it recognition, emotion, and the beginning of a story that would challenge her protective instincts and awaken memories long buried. And though Olivia adjusted her apron and straightened her posture, she could not have anticipated that the person stepping into her cafe this morning would see more than just a shop, and its owner would notice the small details, the subtle resemblance of the children, and in that instant, without a word spoken, the delicate thread connecting past and present had begun to weave itself, marking the start of a day where secrets would edge closer to revelation, emotions would stir beneath composed exteriors, and the ordinary routine of a cafe morning would become the stage for events that would reshape the lives of Olivia, Ava, Noah, and the man who had unexpectedly returned to her world, a return that held the potential to unlock truths, heal old wounds, and create new possibilities in ways Olivia had never imagined, all unfolding quietly at first, under the hum of espresso machines and the chatter of regular customers, as a seemingly simple morning set the scene for the remarkable story about to unfold. The bell above the cafe door chimed softly, a familiar sound that usually blended into the rhythm of Olivia's day, but this time something felt different. She glanced up from the espresso machine and noticed a tall man entering with the quiet confidence of someone accustomed to being noticed, yet he carried himself with surprising humility. Dressed in a dark overcoat and simple button-down shirt, he paused near the entrance and looked around the cafe, as if appreciating its warmth before approaching the counter. Olivia immediately recognized him, not personally, but from countless magazine covers and local business articles. Ethan Walker, one of the most successful entrepreneurs in the country. Her stomach tightened unexpectedly. She lowered her eyes and focused on preparing an order, hoping her reaction would not show. Ethan stepped forward and offered a polite smile. "Good morning. This place smells incredible." Olivia returned the smile professionally. "Thank you. What can I get started for you?" Ethan ordered a black coffee and a blueberry muffin, then stepped aside to wait. It should have been a completely ordinary interaction, yet something about the moment unsettled Olivia. She could not explain why. Across the room, Ava and Noah sat at a small table working on a coloring book before school. Their matching blonde hair and bright blue eyes often attracted attention, especially because they looked so remarkably alike. Ethan's gaze drifted toward them briefly. A smile appeared on his face as he watched Noah carefully help Ava choose a color for her drawing. The simple sibling interaction seemed to amuse him. When Olivia brought his coffee to the counter, Ethan thanked her and then glanced toward the children again. "Twins?" he asked casually. Olivia felt a flash of tension she quickly concealed. "Yes," she replied. "They are 8 years old." Ethan nodded. "They seem close." Olivia softened slightly. "They are best friends." The conversation ended there, but Ethan found himself continuing to notice the children throughout the morning. Every few minutes, one of them would laugh or ask Olivia a question, and each time she responded with patience and affection. It was impossible not to admire the little family dynamic. Meanwhile, Olivia quietly hoped he would finish his coffee and leave. Not because he had done anything wrong. In fact, he seemed unusually kind and respectful. But his presence stirred a discomfort she could not identify. As the cafe became busier, Ethan remained seated near a window, reviewing documents on his laptop. Several customers recognized him and attempted brief conversations, which he handled graciously before returning to his work. At one point, Noah accidentally dropped a box of crayons near Ethan's table. Before Olivia could reach them, Ethan stood and helped gather the scattered crayons. "Thanks," Noah said with a grin. "You are welcome," Ethan replied. Ava studied him curiously. "Mom says we should always thank people who help." Ethan laughed softly. "Your mom sounds very smart." Olivia watched the exchange from behind the counter, feeling both grateful and uneasy. There was something strangely natural about seeing Ethan interact with the twins. Later that morning, after finishing his coffee, Ethan finally stood to leave. As he approached the counter to pay, his eyes landed on a framed photograph displayed behind Olivia. The picture showed Olivia holding Ava and Noah several years earlier. Ethan paused for a second longer than necessary. A faint expression of confusion crossed his face. Something about the children felt oddly familiar, though he could not explain why. Olivia noticed the look immediately, and her heartbeat quickened. Ethan smiled politely, thanked her again, and walked toward the door. Yet as he stepped outside, one unexpected thought lingered in his mind. For reasons he could not understand, he suddenly felt certain that this would not be the last time he visited that cafe. Over the next several days, Ethan found himself thinking about the cafe far more often than he expected. He had visited hundreds of restaurants, coffee shops, and meeting spaces throughout his career, yet something about Olivia's cafe remained fixed in his mind. At first, he assumed it was simply because the atmosphere felt genuine in a world that often seemed focused on appearances. But the more he reflected on that morning, the more his thoughts returned to the twins. There had been something strangely familiar about them. Their bright blue eyes, their expressions, even the way Noah tilted his head when he spoke. Ethan could not explain it, yet the feeling persisted. 3 days later, he found himself walking through the cafe door again. Olivia looked up from the register and immediately felt her stomach tighten. She had hoped his first visit had been a coincidence connected to a business meeting nearby. Apparently, it had not been. Ethan smiled politely. "Good morning." "Good morning," Olivia replied, doing her best to sound casual. Ethan ordered the same coffee as before and took a seat near the window. This time, however, he was not carrying a laptop. Instead, he simply sat quietly, occasionally reading a newspaper and observing the comfortable rhythm of the cafe. Ava and Noah arrived shortly afterward before school, settling into their usual table. As soon as they entered, Ethan noticed them. He also noticed how naturally they interacted with Olivia. There was an obvious bond between them, one built on years of trust and affection. At one point, Ava approached the counter to ask for a muffin. Ethan happened to be standing nearby. "You are back?" Ava said cheerfully. Ethan laughed. "I guess I am. Mom says people come back when they like the coffee." Ethan glanced toward Olivia. "Your mom might be right." Ava smiled proudly. "She is usually right." Ethan found himself smiling long after she returned to her table. The interaction was brief, but it left him with the same unusual feeling he had experienced during his first visit. Later that afternoon, after leaving the cafe, Ethan attended a business luncheon. Yet while conversations unfolded around him, his attention drifted elsewhere. Images of the twins continued to surface in his mind. Finally, during a break, he opened an old photo album stored on his phone. The pictures stretched back years. Family gatherings, friends, college memories. Eventually, he stopped at a photograph taken more than a decade earlier. It showed Ethan standing beside a young woman during a summer festival. Olivia. For several seconds, he stared at the image. Then he looked more closely at Olivia's eyes in the photograph. The same shade of blue. The same shape he had noticed in the twins. Ethan leaned back slowly. Rationally, he knew eye color alone meant nothing. Yet the similarities were becoming increasingly difficult to ignore. Meanwhile, Across town, Olivia sat at her kitchen table after putting the children to bed. She could sense that something was changing. Ethan's return to the cafe had unsettled her far more than she wanted to admit. She had spent years building a stable life around one carefully protected secret. Now, for the first time in nearly a decade, she felt that secret shifting beneath the surface. She looked toward a framed family photograph resting on a nearby shelf. Ava and Noah smiled brightly from the picture. Olivia closed her eyes briefly. She had always known there was a possibility the truth might eventually emerge. She simply never expected that possibility to walk through her cafe door, carrying a cup of coffee and a polite smile. As she turned off the kitchen light and headed upstairs, neither she nor Ethan realized that the growing sense of familiarity connecting them was about to become impossible to ignore. The following week brought a series of small moments that would have seemed insignificant to anyone else, yet to Ethan they felt impossible to ignore. His schedule remained packed with meetings, investor calls, and business travel plans, but somehow he continued finding reasons to stop by Olivia's cafe. Sometimes he arrived early in the morning before heading downtown. Other times he appeared in the afternoon for a quick coffee between appointments. Each visit seemed perfectly reasonable on its own. Together, however, they formed a pattern that even Ethan recognized. He was searching for something, though he still could not fully define what it was. During one visit, he noticed Noah reading a book at a corner table. The boy's concentration reminded Ethan of himself at the same age. On another afternoon, Ava excitedly explained a school science project while waiting for Olivia to finish serving customers. Ethan found himself listening with genuine interest. The children seemed remarkably comfortable around him, which surprised Olivia as much as it surprised Ethan. One rainy afternoon, the cafe became unusually quiet. Ava and Noah were helping wipe down tables after school, while Olivia organized inventory behind the counter. Ethan sat near the window reviewing documents when Noah approached. "Can I ask you a question?" Noah said. Ethan smiled. "Of course. Mom said you own a lot of companies." Ethan nodded. "A few." Noah looked impressed. "Did you always know what you wanted to do?" Ethan laughed softly. "Not even close." The conversation continued for several minutes. As Ethan listened, he noticed something unexpected. Noah's expressions, the way he furrowed his brow while thinking, and even certain gestures felt strangely familiar. Not familiar in a general sense. Familiar in a deeply personal way. The realization unsettled him. Later that evening, after leaving the cafe, Ethan found himself looking through old photographs again. This time, he focused on pictures from his 20s, when he and Olivia had been together. Memory after memory resurfaced. Summer road trips, community events, plans for a future they had once imagined building together. Then he noticed something he had never considered before. In several photographs, Olivia was standing beside him with the exact same bright blue eyes he now saw every time he looked at Ava and Noah. Ethan set the photograph down and stared into the distance. Rational explanations still existed. Similar features could be coincidence. Yet the number of similarities continued growing. Across town, Olivia was experiencing her own growing anxiety. She had noticed the way Ethan occasionally looked at the children, not with suspicion or judgment, but with curiosity. The kind of curiosity that gradually leads people toward answers. She knew better than anyone how intelligent Ethan was. Years ago, one of the things she admired most about him was his ability to notice details others overlooked. That same quality now terrified her. After putting the twins to bed, Olivia sat alone at the kitchen table. The house was quiet except for the ticking of a clock on the wall. Her eyes drifted toward a small box stored on a nearby shelf. Inside were photographs, letters, and memories she had carefully protected for years. She opened the box and removed a picture taken long before Ava and Noah were born. The photograph showed a younger Olivia standing beside Ethan, both smiling at the camera. For several seconds, she simply stared at it. Then she whispered softly, "I never wanted to hurt you." The words disappeared into the empty room. At that exact moment, Ethan sat in his apartment looking at a different photograph from the same period of his life. Neither of them knew it yet, but the distance between questions and answers was becoming smaller with every passing day, and the coincidences that once seemed harmless were beginning to form a picture neither of them would be able to ignore much longer. The memories Olivia had worked so hard to keep buried seemed determined to return. Over the next several days, Every interaction with Ethan made it more difficult to separate the present from the past. The cafe continued operating as it always had. Customers came and went. Orders were prepared. Bills were paid. School schedules were managed. From the outside, nothing had changed. Yet internally, Olivia felt as though she were walking a narrow bridge between two different lives. One was the life she had carefully built around Ava and Noah. The other was the life she had once imagined with Ethan many years earlier. One afternoon, after the twins had left for a school field trip, the cafe was unusually quiet. Ethan arrived shortly before lunch and ordered his usual coffee. This time, instead of sitting near the window, he chose a stool at the counter. Olivia prepared his drink while silently hoping the conversation would remain casual. For a few minutes, they discussed ordinary topics: the weather, local events, business developments in town. Then Ethan surprised her. "Do you ever think about Millfield?" he asked. Olivia nearly dropped the coffee cup she was holding. Millfield was the small town where they had grown up together, the place where their story had begun. She placed the cup on the counter and forced a calm expression. "Sometimes," she answered. Ethan nodded thoughtfully. "I drove through there last month." Olivia felt her heart tighten. "Really? It looked smaller than I remembered." A faint smile crossed his face. "Funny how that happens." For a moment, both of them seemed transported back in time. The years between then and now felt strangely thin. Ethan looked down at his coffee before speaking again. "I found some old photographs recently." Olivia's pulse quickened. "Did you?" There were a lot of familiar faces. His voice remained gentle. "Including yours." Neither spoke for several seconds. The silence carried more meaning than either was willing to acknowledge. Finally, Olivia managed a small smile. "That was a long time ago." Ethan looked directly at her. "Sometimes it does not feel that long." The honesty in his response caught her off guard. Later that evening, after closing the cafe, Olivia returned home and found herself unable to stop thinking about the conversation. She eventually opened the memory box again. Inside were letters, photographs, and keepsakes she had not examined in years. Among them was a photograph taken during their final summer together. She remembered how hopeful they had been, how certain they were that distance would never separate them. Then life changed. Ethan left to pursue opportunities in another state. Communication became less frequent. Unexpected complications followed. By the time Olivia realized she was pregnant, circumstances felt overwhelming. Several misunderstandings and missed conversations created a distance neither of them knew how to bridge. As months passed, Olivia convinced herself that moving forward alone was the best choice. Looking back now, she often wondered whether that decision had protected her family or simply prolonged the pain. Across town, Ethan sat alone in his apartment reviewing old photographs again. The memories no longer felt distant. They felt immediate, real. For years, he had accepted that Olivia belonged to his past. Now she stood behind the counter of a cafe only minutes away. The coincidence seemed almost impossible. Yet another question continued growing louder in his mind. Not a question about their history. Not a question about why they separated. A question about the twins. Every instinct told him there was something important he was missing. And for the first time since he walked into the cafe, Ethan realized he was no longer simply curious about Olivia's past. He was beginning to believe that part of his own future might somehow be connected to it. The question refused to leave Ethan alone. No matter how busy his days became, his thoughts continued circling back to Olivia, Ava, and Noah. What began as curiosity had slowly transformed into something deeper. He was no longer noticing random similarities. He was noticing patterns. The twins were 8 years old. He and Olivia had lost contact almost 9 years earlier. Their features carried unmistakable traces of her, yet every time he looked at Noah's determined expression or Ava's bright blue eyes, he felt an uncomfortable sense of recognition. Ethan disliked making assumptions, especially about something so personal. Yet the possibility growing in his mind could no longer be ignored. A few days later, he arrived at the cafe during a quiet afternoon. Ava and Noah were sitting near the front window finishing homework, while Olivia balanced paperwork behind the counter. Ethan greeted everyone with his usual warmth before ordering coffee. The twins immediately smiled. By now, they considered him a familiar visitor. "Look what I got on my science test," Noah said proudly, holding up a paper marked with a high grade. Ethan congratulated him and spent a few minutes listening as both children enthusiastically described their school projects. Olivia watched from behind the counter. The sight filled her with conflicting emotions. Part of her appreciated how naturally Ethan connected with them. Another part felt increasingly frightened by it. Later, after the twins stepped outside briefly with a teacher who was organizing a community activity nearby, Ethan found himself alone with Olivia. The cafe was nearly empty. The silence felt heavier than usual. Finally, Ethan spoke. "Can I ask you something?" Olivia immediately sensed the seriousness in his voice. "What is it?" Ethan hesitated. For perhaps the first time in years, he looked uncertain. "Why did we really lose contact?" The question landed softly, yet its impact was enormous. Olivia lowered her eyes. She had expected many conversations. Somehow, she had hoped this one would never arrive. "Life happened," she answered quietly. Ethan shook his head. "That is not the whole story." Olivia looked toward the window. "Maybe not." Ethan remained calm. There was no accusation in his voice. Only sincerity. "I spent years believing you chose to move on." Olivia swallowed hard. "And I spent years believing the same thing about you." The admission created a painful silence between them. Ethan leaned forward slightly. "Olivia, I tried to reach you." Her eyes widened. "What?" "I called. I wrote letters. I even came back to Millfield once." Olivia stared at him in disbelief. "I never received anything." For several seconds, neither spoke. Then the reality slowly settled over both of them. The separation that had shaped nearly a decade of their lives may not have been a choice at all. It may have been built on misunderstandings, missed messages, and circumstances neither fully understood. The realization left them both shaken. That evening, after returning home, Olivia sat alone in the kitchen long after the twins were asleep. Tears filled her eyes as she thought about everything Ethan had said. If he truly tried to find her, then many of the assumptions she had carried for years were wrong. Nearby, a framed photograph of Ava and Noah rested on the counter. Olivia looked at it for a long time. The secret she had protected for 8 years suddenly felt heavier than ever before. Across town, Ethan sat in his apartment staring at another old photograph. The conversation had answered one question while creating an even larger one. For the first time, he began wondering whether Olivia had been carrying a burden all these years that he knew nothing about. And deep inside, a quiet voice continued asking the same question again and again. What if the truth was far bigger than he had ever imagined? For 3 days after their conversation, Olivia avoided being alone with Ethan. She remained polite whenever he visited the cafe, but she carefully kept busy serving customers, organizing supplies, or helping Ava and Noah with homework. Ethan noticed the change immediately. The warmth that had gradually returned between them was still there, but now it seemed wrapped in caution. He respected her need for space, yet the questions growing inside him refused to disappear. The more he thought about their past, the more convinced he became that an important piece of the story remained hidden. One Saturday afternoon, the cafe hosted a small community fundraiser. Families filled the room, children colored holiday decorations, and local musicians played soft acoustic music near the front window. Olivia spent most of the event moving from table to table, making sure everything ran smoothly. Ethan arrived shortly after lunch and quietly joined the crowd. As always, Ava and Noah immediately greeted him. Over the past few weeks, the twins had grown comfortable around him in a way that surprised everyone, including themselves. At one point, Noah asked Ethan to help assemble a small model airplane kit that had been included in one of the fundraiser activities. Ethan agreed, and the two spent nearly an hour working together while Ava sat nearby decorating a poster. Olivia occasionally glanced across the room and felt an ache she could not describe. Watching them together felt natural. Too natural. Later that afternoon, a volunteer photographer moved through the cafe taking pictures for the town newsletter. Near the end of the event, he suggested a group photo. Families gathered together, smiling for the camera. Without thinking, Ava grabbed Ethan's hand and pulled him closer. Noah immediately stood on Ethan's other side. The photographer snapped several pictures. As the flash went off, Olivia felt her breath catch. The image looked less like a community event photograph and more like a family portrait. Ethan noticed it too. For a brief moment, neither could look away from the scene in front of them. That evening, after the fundraiser ended and the twins were asleep, Olivia remained alone in the cafe finishing paperwork. The building was quiet except for the hum of refrigerators and the occasional sound of traffic outside. She stared at one of the fundraiser photographs that had already been posted online. The image showed Ethan standing beside Ava and Noah. The resemblance was impossible to ignore now. Tears filled her eyes. For years she had convinced herself she was protecting everyone involved. She believed she was protecting her children from uncertainty. She believed she was protecting Ethan from disruption. Most of all, she believed she was protecting herself from rejection. But after learning that Ethan had spent years trying to contact her, those beliefs no longer felt as solid. A soft knock at the door interrupted her thoughts. Olivia looked up and saw Ethan standing outside. After a brief hesitation, she unlocked the door. Ethan stepped inside. Neither spoke immediately. Finally, Ethan looked at her with a calm sincerity that made it impossible to hide behind excuses. "Olivia," he said gently, "I think you have been carrying something alone for a very long time." Her eyes immediately filled with tears. Ethan took a slow breath. "I am not asking because I am angry. I am asking because I care." The room felt completely still. Olivia lowered her gaze toward the floor. For years, she had rehearsed countless versions of this moment. Yet now that it had arrived, every prepared explanation disappeared. Her voice trembled as she finally whispered the words she had feared for 8 years. "There is something you deserve to know." Ethan's heart began to race. The secret that had shaped both of their lives was finally approaching the surface, and for the first time, neither of them could turn away from it. The silence inside the cafe felt almost overwhelming after Olivia's words. Ethan remained standing across from her, his expression calm but attentive. He could see how difficult this moment was for her. Years of fear, uncertainty, and responsibility seemed to rest on her shoulders. For a long time, neither of them spoke. Finally, Olivia took a slow breath and sat down at one of the empty tables. Ethan quietly joined her. Outside, the evening streets continued their normal rhythm, completely unaware that 2 lives were about to change forever. Olivia stared at her hands before finding the courage to continue. "When you left Millfield, I truly believed we would find our way back to each other," she said softly. Ethan listened without interruption. Then everything became complicated. Calls stopped coming. Letters never arrived. Every month that passed made me feel more certain that you had moved on. Ethan lowered his eyes. The regret on his face was impossible to miss. "I never stopped trying to reach you." Olivia nodded slowly. "I believe that now." Tears filled her eyes. "But back then, I did not know." She paused for several seconds before continuing. "A few months after we lost contact, I found out I was pregnant." Ethan's entire body became still. The words seemed to hang in the air between them. Olivia continued carefully. "At first, I planned to find you. I wanted you to know. But every attempt failed. By then, I believed you had started a new life somewhere else." Ethan could barely breathe. Deep inside, he already knew what she was about to say, yet hearing it felt entirely different. Olivia finally looked up and met his eyes. "Ava and Noah are your children." For several moments, Ethan simply stared at her. There was no anger in his expression, no accusation, only shock, emotion, and the weight of a truth that had arrived years later than it should have. Olivia's tears began to fall. "I never wanted to keep them from you out of spite," she said. "I was scared." Then the years passed, and every year it became harder to explain. Ethan remained silent. His eyes glistened as he struggled to process everything. Memories rushed through his mind. The familiar features. The connection he felt every time he spoke with the twins. The photograph at the fundraiser. Suddenly, every unanswered question made sense. After a long silence, Ethan finally spoke. "They are really mine." Olivia nodded. "Yes." Ethan leaned back in his chair and covered his face briefly with one hand. Not because he was upset, but because the emotion was almost impossible to contain. 8 years. 8 birthdays. 8 years of first days at school, holidays, family moments, and milestones he never knew existed. Yet alongside the sadness came something else. Gratitude. Ava and Noah were healthy, loved, happy. Olivia had given them a wonderful life despite carrying the burden alone. Eventually, Ethan looked at her again. "Why did you never tell them about me?" Olivia swallowed hard. "Because I did not know what to tell them. I did not know where you were. I did not know if you would ever come back." Ethan slowly nodded. For the first time, he fully understood the fear she had carried. Neither of them had intended for life to unfold this way. They had simply been separated by circumstances, misunderstandings, and time. The truth was finally out. Nothing could change the years behind them. But as Ethan sat across from Olivia, one realization became impossible to ignore. The secret that had once kept them apart no longer existed. And for the first time in nearly a decade, the future was no longer hidden behind unanswered questions. The days following the revelation were filled with emotions none of them had expected. Olivia and Ethan agreed not to rush anything. The truth had finally come into the open, but they both understood that the most important people in the situation were Ava and Noah. Every decision moving forward needed to be made with care, patience, and honesty. A week later, on a quiet Sunday afternoon, Olivia sat with the twins in their living room. Ethan was scheduled to arrive soon. Ava and Noah sensed that something important was happening. Olivia held their hands and spoke gently. She explained that there was someone they already knew who cared about them very much. Someone who had been part of her life long before they were born. The children listened carefully, their expressions filled with curiosity. When she finally explained that Ethan was their father, the room became very quiet. Olivia had spent years imagining this conversation and fearing every possible outcome. Yet what happened next surprised her. Noah was the first to speak. The man from the cafe? Olivia smiled through tears. Yes. Ava looked thoughtful for a moment before asking, "Does he know?" Olivia nodded. "He knows now." Before she could say anything else, the doorbell rang. A few moments later, Ethan entered the house. For perhaps the first time in his life, he looked genuinely nervous. Business meetings, public speeches, and major negotiations had never affected him this way. But this moment mattered more than any professional achievement ever could. Ava and Noah stood quietly as Ethan approached. For a second, nobody spoke. Then Noah smiled. That explains a lot. The unexpected comment immediately broke the tension. Ethan laughed softly, and even Olivia found herself smiling. What followed was not a dramatic moment. It was something much more meaningful. It was the beginning of a relationship. Ethan answered questions, listened to stories, and shared memories from his own childhood. The twins responded with the same openness and warmth they had always shown him. The difference now was that everyone finally understood why the connection felt so natural. Over the following months, Ethan became a steady presence in their lives. He attended school events, helped with science projects, and spent weekends creating new memories with the children. He never tried to make up for lost time with grand gestures. Instead, he focused on showing up consistently. That mattered far more. As for Olivia and Ethan, their relationship rebuilt itself slowly and honestly. The years apart could never be erased, but they no longer defined the future. What mattered was the understanding they had gained and the family they were creating together. One evening near the end of the school year, the four of them attended a community festival. As they walked through the crowd, Ava ran ahead toward a game booth while Noah excitedly pointed out a food stand. Olivia watched the children and felt a sense of peace she had not experienced in years. Ethan stepped beside her and smiled. "Quite a journey, huh?" Olivia laughed softly. That is one way to describe it. They stood together watching the twins enjoy the evening. The setting sun cast a warm glow across the festival grounds, and for a moment everything felt perfectly simple. Not because life had been easy, not because mistakes had never been made, but because honesty had finally replaced uncertainty. Olivia thought back to all the years she spent protecting a secret she believed would keep her family safe. In the end, the truth had not destroyed their lives. It had brought the missing pieces together. Sometimes the greatest surprises arrive when people stop hiding from the past and begin trusting the future. And as Ethan stood beside the woman he had never truly forgotten and watched the children he had finally found, he knew that the family he never expected had become the most important part of his life.